think really the state of the MOD, it's in such a bad place that nobody's going to argue that they don't need 2.5%. And actually, as part of a review, you're probably going to find that there's going to be a lot of military chiefs arguing that they need far more money.
Keir Starmer in Washington today to meet NATO leaders to discuss threats to the West, most notably from Russia. Keir Starmer telling reporters that he plans to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, saying that promise is cast iron, but won't put a timeline on it. Were actually happening, which has sparked quite a lot of criticism from former military leaders. Well, Larisa Brown, the Times of Defence, had been rounding them all up. Hi, Larisa.
Hello.
So explain, first of all, the significance of 2.5% of GDP. This is the entire size of our economy. We would spend 2.5%. Why is it 2.5%?
So it's 2.3% at the moment. A lot of NATO allies are calling for countries to spend 2.5%. The current NATO target is actually just 2%. And the Tories, when they were in government, said that they were going to commit to this 2.5%, which would mean billions more pounds for defence every year. And of course, they said that we're in the most dangerous period in decades, and it's important that more money goes to defence. Now, Labour also said that they would reach that 2.5% target, but crucially, they haven't set out this timeline. And people that I was speaking to in the MOD thought they were going to do that today at the NATO summit, but they haven't. They've instead announced that they will tie that into this major defence review that they're going to take, going to initiate next week. And it could be potentially up to a year before actually we see any detail on when they're going to increase defence spending.
Is there, just sort of rewinding a bit, because I get that the idea that you have this target of 2%, so that everyone's paying a sort of proportion, smaller countries paying less and bigger countries paying more. Would it not make more sense to work out how big we want the military to be and the equipment that we want and the forces that we want, and then work out how much it costs, rather than starting with the check first and then working out what you can buy with it afterwards?
Well, I've been speaking to people on both sides of this fence, and I think really the state of the MOD, it's in such a bad place that nobody's going to argue that they don't need 2.5%. And actually, as part of a review, you're probably going to find that there's going to be a lot of military chiefs arguing that they need far more money. And so some people are saying, well, actually, you're going to commit to this 2.5%. Tell us now how you're going to do it and when you're going to do it. So then the review can actually encompass that new money that they're going to get, and they can work out what they can spend it on. But obviously, Labour's position is that, no, we need this big review to work out exactly what we need. And so you can see both sides. But crucially, time is ticking, and there are wars in Ukraine. There's obviously Gaza ongoing. There's potential for this to all flare up in Lebanon, and a lot of former military figures think that spending now is absolutely crucial.
Obviously, one of the big questions hanging over NATO is if Donald Trump comes back as US president, because he's been much more hostile. Well, he has been. I mean, he says different things at different times. What is his latest thought about NATO?
Well, I think the general view is that he could still. He will threaten to pull out of NATO if people don't increase their defence spending. And so a lot of Eastern European countries think that by committing to a new target of 2.5%, that'll placate Trump and make him happy. Keir Starmer is actually in Washington arguing that other countries should be increasing their defence spending in line with comments by Trump. But actually, somebody said to me that it seemed to be a bit hypocritical that Keir should be arguing for other countries to spend more when he's actually not setting out his own timeline.
We'll see if there's any more detail which emerges when he's up and about and doing a press conference on that later. Larisa, really good to see you. Larisa Brown there, the Times Defence editor. Plenty more on the debate around defence spending online at thetimes.com, of course.
In these dangerous times, the Labour government is committing to increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, but the party won't agree to a timetable for reaching that target. A whole antique shop of former top military brass has told Times Radio that they need to get on with it. Labour is playing with fire, says one of them in the Times this morning. Let's speak to Luke Pollard, who is Minister for the Armed Forces. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I know that you have a timetable, you want to stick to it, you want to do this review, which is starting next week, but you will have heard from, all these different former top military brass who are concerned. They don't want you to delay it. Lord West says Keir Starmer is playing with fire on defence spending. Nick Carter has said, as it stands, we're not ready for war. How much attention do you pay to those kind of people and what they're saying?
Well, I'm always grateful for those people with lots of military experience sharing their views. I think it's really important. I mean, the key assessment that they're making, that we're living in more dangerous times, is not wrong. We know that there's a threat to Russia, not only to our friends in Ukraine, who are continuing to fight off their illegal and criminal invasion that Putin has delivered to that country, with all the pain that is going with it, but we're seeing a rise of instability in the Middle East. We're seeing a rise of authoritarian states around the world. And we know that we have a military that has been hollowed out and underfunded over the last 14 years. They're the words of the former Defence Secretary in the last government, Ben Wallace. So we do need to make sure that we're modernising our armed forces, that they've got the kit and equipment necessary. And that's why this defence review next week is so important, that we'll be announcing, because it will look at what are the capabilities we need to deter the aggression that we are facing in the 21st century. What lessons will we need to learn from the conflict in Ukraine? And how do we make sure that any increased defence spending, and we are committed to getting to 2.5%, is directed at British industry to make sure that we're buying British equipment for our armed forces, creating jobs right across our nations and regions in the UK.
Okay, now there'll be some people who say this is completely sensible. You know, do a review, do a stock take, and then announce what you're going to do. And there'll be other people who say, well, hang on a second. You know, for example, on immigration, you say you want to bring immigration down, but you won't give a target. On this, you say you want to do it. There's not enough money. It's underfunded, but you won't say by when you want to get to this target. And it makes some people jittery. Can you understand that?
Well, I want to see a clear set of priorities about where we want to spend increased defence spending. That, for me, seems to be a logical next step. That's why the strategic defence review that we'll be announcing next week will set out the process as to how we recognise the gaps we have in our armed forces and how do we fill them. Now, for me, it's the sequencing, not just the headline figure, that's important here, because we know that there are gaps in some of our capabilities. For example, we have given quite correctly a large amount of our army equipment. The AS-90 artillery, for instance, is now almost all in Ukraine. Though that means there's a capability gap in the UK we need to fill. We need to make sure we're sending the right signals to industry so they can get the right equipment in place, get the supply chains in place to deliver the equipment that we need for our armed forces. And that sequence is important because we need to do so alongside our allies. So this will be a NATO-first strategic defence review, a focus on our unshakable commitment to the North Atlantic, to the Europe area, to make sure that we're keeping not only the UK safe, but keeping our allies safe. Because if we don't support Ukraine, and if they don't win, Russia won't stop there. If we're not supporting our allies in the Baltic states, there will be continuing threats to the United Kingdom as well as to the rest of NATO.
It's also just a fact, though, isn't it, that to get from 2.3 to 2.5%, you have to move money. You have to take it from somewhere else and put it into defence. And that's obviously a concern, because somewhere else is going to lose out.
Well, that's not the premise that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor Rachel Reeves have set out. I mean, the number one mission of this Labour government is growth. If we don't grow our economy, there won't be the money, not just for defence, but also for hospitals, for schools, for prisons, a whole array of public services that we know need investment after 14 years. That's why the primary mission is to grow our economy. And in defence, we can do that by making sure that what we're spending on defence, and it's a multi-billion-pound budget that we spend on defence equipment support every year, is directed at UK companies. Far too many of the contracts we saw in the past few years have gone to foreign companies. Now, that might be great in terms of supporting jobs elsewhere, but our focus is making sure that we're growing the UK economy. And with a larger UK economy, there'll be more resources able to support our commitment to get to 2.5%, but our commitment to repair the damage that's been done to so many of our public services right across the public sphere.
Okay, I want to move on and talk about Rwanda very quickly. We haven't got much time. I just wanted to ask you finally, in terms of timescale, is that this review is going to start next week? Do you know how long it will take, when it will end?
Well, when it comes to Rwanda, we've stopped the Rwanda gimmick in terms of the immigration.
I'm going to come on to that, but just in terms of the defence review, it's going to start next week. Is there any indication of how long that's going to take?
Well, the manifesto sets out that we want to deliver this within a year. We want to deliver it faster than that because of the urgency of the situations we're facing. The Prime Minister has been very clear. He wants this review delivered at pace. That is our ambition in the Ministry of Defence, to deliver it at pace. But there are decisions that can be taken outside the review. One of those is making sure that we're supporting our armed forces with better military accommodation, because we know rubbish accommodation is one of the reasons that so many people are leaving military service, which is one of the reasons that we're seeing a smaller and smaller armed force each year. And so there are things that we can do outside of this defence review that will make a difference to the strength of our armed forces, the morale of our armed forces that we know has been falling over recent years, and to make sure that we've got the fighting forces we need to deter any aggression.
Final question then on Rwanda. You've already said that you think it's a gimmick. There is £270 million down the drain. There's nothing to show for it. Of course, you're going to say that's the Conservatives' fault, and that is your right. James Cleverly said in the Times today, when Labour cancelled the Rwanda policy on day one and got rid of our small boats deterrent, what did they tell the experts at the National Crime Agency who said we need a deterrent? And did Labour have the courtesy to engage with the Rwandans before they broke off an economic partnership with a Commonwealth country? Do you know the answer to either of those questions?
Well, I think the Rwanda gimmick was dead on arrival. It was a gimmick. We've, as a country, spent an enormous amount of money that should have been spent on securing our border. That's why within the first few days of being elected, Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, set out our Secure Border Command, the efforts to improve cross-border policing, to smash the gangs, with new directions to the National Crime Agency to expand their focus on this. I'm afraid the deterrent that came from the Rwanda gimmick didn't stop the increased numbers that we've seen making that dangerous crossing across the channel under the last government. It was a waste of money. We can't waste valuable public money. We've just spoken about how tight finances are and how important we spend every pound wisely. And spending hundreds of millions of pounds on something that has delivered no people being deported to Rwanda, I'm afraid, is a complete hideous waste of money. That's why we stop that policy. That's why we're investing in that Secure Border Command, that increased cross-border policing, and dealing with the huge backlog that we've inherited that's costing £8 million a day in hotel bills. These are big challenges we're facing, but we've already taken action to deal with this legacy that we inherited from the last government.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. You've got another interview to go to. Luke Pollard, thank you very much, Minister for the Armed Forces.